Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you back to Soldier Speaks English. And today, once again, I've got my esteemed guest, Eric Sperling, with me, who is the executive director of Just Foreign Policy in Washington, D.C. And he advises on foreign policy issue to U.S. congressmen and U.S. Congress and U.S. Senate. And he's a subject specialist once it comes to Pakistan. And we've been discussing the issues related to Pakistan with Eric Sperling. And we all know that the Cypher case was there, in which we all knew that Donald Liu, on behalf of White House of President Joe Biden, he was instrumental in asking the Pakistani military indirectly rather to remove the government of Imran Khan. And there were denials, public denials by the US government, by the Undersecretary of State Donald Liu himself, by the US deep state. All the various circles of the United States government refused, all right, and they denied the existence of an official cipher, or they even denied that they have said whatsoever they had said. But we all were in possession of this secret document. But finally, the document has seen the light of the day thanks to Washington-based and New York-based Drop Site News. Ryan Grimm runs the website, and we all know that. Murtaza Hassan is there. So those guys have leaked the original cipher of the Pakistani government, which sheds lights on the way the Biden administration, through their Undersecretary of State Donald Liu, played a role in the regime change operation in Pakistan. I mean, usually, Eric, welcome to the show. Usually in the US, after 30 years, the documents does come out and people do write books because then they get declassified. But I think this is the first time ever that American sponsored regime change operation against the democratic government have been exposed so openly. It was exposed straight away, but now we've got evidence after 3 years. So is it going to change anything in Washington, D.C.?
Well, great to be here. Thanks for having me. And, I think the reality is whether Washington wants it or not, things are changing because the world is increasingly aware of the type of tactics the U.S. has historically used to impose the types of government it wants. For those of your viewers may have read, All the Shah's Men, that details in, it really goes into detail about the really involved U.S. role in the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran. And it's just shocking. It's planning, it's everything. And this also happened in Chile. From planning the protest to paying. They're directly doing the entire thing. But over time, of course, that becomes harder to defend. And so the U.S. regime change models, they advance. They try to create more plausible deniability. And so that's what we're seeing here. But I think a lot of us probably reviewed Donald Liu's testimony. We were, my organization, Just Foreign Policy, and put together with a lot of the diaspora, were really involved in trying to make sure that hearing did not have its intended impact. And its intended impact was to destroy this pro-democracy movement by essentially quashing all of those claims. But as you can see from his perspective, he says, I wasn't involved. I didn't do any of it. And he's sort of true. He's sort of correct. The Pakistani military regime and their media and their politicians, they did the actual work on the ground. But the U.S. signaled that if you did that work, we would see it positively. In other words, we will give you the international legitimacy and the economic, viability that you need if you make that happen. And that ultimately is by far the most important part, because obviously Pakistan needs that, both political legitimacy and economic viability. So I think it's, in that sense, it's, by this community, fifth biggest population in the world, very educated population, English speaking, a huge part of it, putting the pressure on, drawing attention to this. And I think by understanding these nuances, it helps not just the Pakistani people hopefully liberate themselves from this sort of neo-colonial arrangement, but it will also help the other people in the world, see these type of tactics and not have it happen to them as well.
Very interesting, Eric. So let's cut to the chase, as you would say in the US. Tell me, is there any chance that Imran Khan would benefit from this actual original cipher coming out and the story breaking out and the way it has been picked up in South Asian media. I mean, definitely the South Asian media has picked it up, not the Pakistani media. Even the Pakistani media is discussing it, all right? So the story is out there now. So do you think it's going to benefit Imran Khan and the Pakistan, the people who have voted? That's almost 90% of the people of Pakistan who voted for Imran Khan. Is it going to benefit the democracy in Pakistan?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, and I'm here, in the East Coast of the United States, but from my sense is that the Pakistani military regime is essentially hoping for this Imran Khan moment to pass. It's been a multi-decade movement, but they're still hoping that by having him locked up, by keeping him out of contact, by targeting the family, preventing the party, any party officials from freely engaging with him, they're hoping that the Pakistani people will move on from this, and that they'll be able to go back to the arrangement where they just had, these military-backed parties that pretend to be different but are obviously just in one group, and that's pretty transparent now. So my sense is that anything that reminds people of what took place and it keeps discussion of him alive is essentially their worst case scenario. I think they have a pretty tough situation in the first place. I was just thinking about this. I mean, it's just it is a little remarkable as an outsider, not Pakistani, just to think about the Sharifs, Asim Munir versus Imran Khan, one of the great, athletes, great international stars, obviously the most well-known and renowned Pakistani person really in history anyway. So I think they have a tough uphill battle in the first place. So I do think that by keeping the attention on, by kind of rekindling people's outrage and reminding people of what took place, I think it should have a benefit. That said, there's still a lot more that needs to be done in terms of legwork to really ensure that that he's freed, and that the result of this, what you could call kind of a legislative coup, or kind of we call something lawfare coup, to ensure that the result of that is overturned and democracy is restored.
Eric, you've got the pulse of Washington, D.C. Under the current circumstances, where Trump calls a Pakistani dictator the de facto ruler of Pakistan, Asim Munir, as his favorite field marshal, but the favorite field marshal have been unable to deliver upon his promises, may it be delivering Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan or delivering a peace deal as to the liking of President Trump. He has been unable to deliver it. It's quite clear. So under the circumstances, what is the pulse regarding the Pakistani de facto ruler and the hybrid regime? Are they still the favorites of President Trump? Obviously, there are certain business dealings going on, but I'm sure they can only offer as much. So what is the sentiment amongst the Trump administration or amongst the American right about the present Pakistani regime?
Yeah, well, I think as your viewers are probably very well aware, there's been a focus on getting this current regime in the Trump family and in the Trump network's good graces through these business deals. But I think any casual observer could see those deals were not likely to really pay much. There's not a lot of fodder for corrupt payouts there, mostly just because the deals that were discussed weren't really viable. And I think so. And I think since the last time we talked, I'd mentioned that I didn't think that Trump had said Asim Munir's name. I asked people to tell me if they had ever seen him say the name. No one said yes. He said the name here.
That went viral, actually. Yeah, that went viral, actually, once you said that he does not even remember. President Trump doesn't even remember the name of his favorite field marshal, and that went viral. And that is actually true. We have never heard him saying his name out loudly.
Yeah, I think it's worse than not remember. I don't think he ever learned it, actually. I don't think there's any evidence he learned it even one time. I think he heard it once. He said, oh, that's cool. Field marshal. Yeah, this is what we're dealing with. So this is not, hard to describe a relationship that's more surface level than that. This is something that Marco Rubio, who understands the geopolitical stakes of keeping Pakistan in orbit with the kind of the regimes that around the Middle East that are essentially working with the U.S. and Israeli regional plan. That's the main goal for them. I think I completely agree with them that if Imran Khan were to come into power and he were to have a neutral foreign policy like the one that was described as what was it, aggressively neutral? And I'm not, was it the thing? Or, the neutral policy that Lou complained about. If Imran Khan was to have that, it's in the views of kind of the U.S. imperial class, that is like a death blow to U.S.
aggressively. He said, Liu said, aggressively neutral position on Ukraine.
See, and that's exactly what's going on. Is they think that a neutral Pakistan, aggressively neutral, seems reasonable. The average person says, yeah, be really neutral. Let's see, it's really reasonable. That's the average normal human being would think that. But in Washington, obviously, if you're not 100%, if you were in a formerly kind of neo-colonial regime controlled by the West largely, and then you are to become neutral, that's beyond unacceptable. And so that's clearly what we saw. So, all that to say is, I think, we're going to see how these deals pay out. Trump is obviously pretty distracted. The U.S. national security apparatus has a bunch of wars they're trying to get him to either complete or start. But I think, there's going to be real opportunities here in the coming years to shake this up, because for a number of different reasons. We'll have a lot of congressional activity. But I think the key thing to know is that in Washington, the Pakistani American community, with their growing influence, if they really get focused, work closely with people who know Washington, we can really shape this debate, because there aren't that many people on the other side from us. It's a handful of people at state, CIA, and Pentagon. We're talking really 5 or 10 major people that are on the other side from us. And so if we mobilize, 500,000 Pakistani Americans who get really active, get really engaged, and then we use, channel that into a strategic plan to put the pressure on, I really think we can expect to see things change very quickly.
Yeah, that's the way forward, definitely. But finally, Eric, what were you saying? As a layman, I would understand this, not as a layman, but as someone who understands Pakistan like you, the Pakistani establishment's policy and the Pakistani power structures policy like you. So would Washington prefer to have a duplicitous, deceptive policy by Pakistan, in which Pakistan is playing all sides, double dealing of Pakistan? It seems like the double dealing by the Pakistani generals is acceptable to Washington DC. What is not acceptable is a straightforward neutral policy like that, like it was of Imran Khan. But they're okay with the de facto ruler of Pakistan, Asim Munir, playing all the sides, promising things, making promises he cannot keep, and he wants to be in the good graces of Beijing, of Washington DC, of Tehran at the same time, of Riyadh at the same time, while he's unable to deliver anything to anyone. So he's just playing in the middle. He's playing all sides. So would Washington prefer that to a straightforward policy then?
Well, yeah. I mean, and I'm not so sure that Washington sees him as playing all sides. I mean, I think Washington sees him and sees this regime as being in a very tenuous position, given that they have essentially no theoretical economic viability. They don't even have a thought of how you would become economically viable outside of Western support. And so, I think that's a bit, my read is that Washington sees him as in a difficult position, and it actually benefits Washington, this narrative that he's playing all sides, because what would be really harmful for Washington and for him is if it was revealed that he's playing China. Actually, he's actually playing China, and he's actually really aligned with the West. And I think so. That's my sense. So, I think that they're definitely happy with the current arrangement as long as it keeps someone like Imran Khan out of power. That's their number one fear, because he wouldn't just be obviously the most independent-minded Pakistani leader who's had a principled opposition to these problematic U.S. wars that have taken so many tens of thousands of lives in Pakistan for essentially minimal gain, if any. But he's also would be, I think, immediately the most popular and respected Muslim world leader. And the threat that would pose to Israel and the U.S.-Israeli regional order, there's no threat that, in decades you haven't seen any kind of threat, and not any military threat, just the threat of the ideas and the threat of the voice being shared. Because my sense is, and I'm not, my sense is that most of the Muslim world would say, yeah, we agree with him. We agree with Imran Khan, and he's not easy to paint as a radical. So I think mostly, the obsession is to keep someone like Imran Khan out. He's it's more than just, it's a lot bigger threat in a certain way than even say like a Fidel Castro was. Fidel Castro's a significant threat back in that time. But this is even more significant in the sense that the country's, 25 times bigger than Cuba, and that the Muslim world has such a lack of non-radicalized voices that could speak English as well. So I think in that sense, they just view it as a huge threat, and they'll do anything they can to keep him out of power from their perspective geopolitically.
Finally, Eric, before I let you go, what is the future of the U.S. politics? Because Asim Munir, from the Pakistani perspective, is being supported by the Trump administration. And Trump administration is facing an uphill task in the upcoming midterm elections in November. So in 5 months' time, they are going to go into elections. And in the meantime, the U.S. intelligence have already labeled Asim Munir as a red flag and a liability for Trump and company. The U.S. intelligence have warned that, and there have been reports, and I'm just displaying the Economic Times report over here as well. So what is the future of the U.S. Politics after the midterm elections, and what is the future of Pakistani military or hybrid regime, which is currently governing Pakistan under the circumstances?
Yeah, well, in general, I think a lot of the community and the Pakistani diaspora on the world, and I think the number one thing is Imran Khan must remain safe and healthy enough to continue to be able to pose a threat that he would come back, govern a new liberated Pakistan. So as long as he's safe, and he is still a relatively young man, we've seen. I think a lot of people are telling me he'll be okay, because that's really key. As long as he's okay, then the path is clear, and it's just a matter of when the victory happens. And so because of the pressure that the Pakistani American diaspora put on the regime through the United States Congress and here in the U.S., the regime had to really tie itself to the Trump administration, which was a good move. It obviously was successful. Rubio was involved in supporting that, but it has a lot of risks, because now when Democrats win the House back and potentially the Senate, we are going to be able. It's going to be basically impossible for this.
Is that a done deal? Is that a done deal?
I think the House is looking pretty good. I mean, the House is certainly looking good. The Senate's in play. I mean, I think it's unclear, but I think I think that's looking pretty good. I mean, we have Trump's approval is tanking. Gas prices here are through the roof. I mean, people, it's looking, So I think it's not a done deal, but I think it's looking pretty likely. But this shows the risk in the move that they did, which they did in desperation, which is to tie themselves to Trump. But that means that now the entire Democratic Party is going to view them as a Trump-aligned regime. And so essentially they had this bipartisan support. There's going to be some Democratic allies that try to continue to maintain that support, but they're going to be under a lot of pressure because they'll be criticized as aligning with Trump in a corrupt regime that worked with Trump. So I think, they gained a short-term benefit by aligning with Trump, but in the long term, they've essentially made it impossible that they're going to, survive in a medium long-term way, because, they've made themselves partisan, and in the worst way, in the way that it really makes it hardest for them to maintain long-term support. So I think the prognosis is good. We need everybody, and we'll be working with the community to get really focused, really strategic, because the regime does have mega $1 million lobbyists. So the regime has been able to use the funds they get from Pakistani taxes, without any democratic legitimacy, and they've been paying lobbyists to support their own rule. So we have an uphill fight because they have more money than we do. But that's why we do hope that people can, first of all, support strategic groups, and then we really get focused. Really, hopefully, the community will come into its own power, and we can finally see, that the country be liberated from this kind of neo-colonial arrangement. That's the goal.
Thank you, Eric. So the key is to keep the pressure on, and the pressure is definitely working. It is an uphill battle as the people who are fighting the illegitimate regime of Pakistan have got the public funds and resources at their disposal, while as we are only crowdfunding ourselves to, put a fight. But we are putting up a fight, and it is making a difference. And we need to keep on fighting back, fight for democracy, fight against fascism. And we must not get discouraged, because it is definitely working, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see. Thank you so very much, Eric Sperling.
Thank you. Great to talk.